Hey, and welcome to the Unconference session. I'm joined here by Callum Whyte, Matt Brailsford, Stephen, what's your last name, Harland, and Mikkel Keller. First of all, thank you for your good talks, very inspiring, and for Stephen's case, also a bit scary. We have a good amount of questions, so let's jump into it. Some of them are pretty specific, but the first one, I think it is mostly for Callum, but what would be the best way to combine indexes from multiple Umbraco instances into one search? Do you have any recommendations for that?
Well, I know that Mikkel, you touched on this a moment ago as well, but I've used Elasticsearch extensively for exactly that purpose. We've built like APIs that will feed data in from multiple sources into one Elastic instance, and then we can query it in one application. So Elasticsearch is a great way to go. And there's a few Umbraco packages, actually. I'm not sure how up to date for V8, but there's definitely some for V7 where you could effectively completely replace the search with Elastic. I know that ExaminX that Shannon's worked on as well has got, I think, an Elastic provider, or at least someone built one. So yeah, there's plenty of options, but I think Elastic's the best way to go.
Yeah, nice. Also another one for you. So how can you get searches from text inside nested content? Do you have any recommendations for this? I think that is a good question. And
that is a really great question. And so I mentioned, I wish I'd had more time to do the talk. I could probably have spoken for hours. But I did show briefly my search extensions package from Umbraco, and it has got a JSON field type where you can actually supply a JSON path to specific points in that object and index those values accordingly, even into additional fields. So the example I've actually got is Matt's vendor variance picker is based on variance editors based on the block list, and it stores a big JSON object. But if I want to pull values out of those variants and index them, you can effectively supply a JSON path, and it will index those values as if they were, a multiple picker or whatever you want to do. So yeah, go check out the search extensions package. There's some documentation on there for indexing JSON.
Oh, nice. Let's jump to some questions for you, Matt. I'm also interested in this one. How long did you spend on each solution until you know that this wasn't the right one? Did you complete them completely, or did you realize earlier?
Yeah, I mean, the Gridson one took quite a while, which was the first one we did, because of the folder structure that we had, and we had to do some really weird stuff in terms of grabbing the data and forcing it into the GraphQL database into the structure and creating a lot of references. So there was a lot of complicated stuff that I ended up doing there. But that saw us good for a while. But that took probably a month or two, maybe a month, just because of the difficulties in that stuff. Then the next one, I spent probably way more time than I should have done on that one. That one was pretty much ready to be deployed, and I was going to do that. So it was all finished. And again, that was probably weeks of development on that one. The Umbraco one, I canned pretty quickly in terms of, I did it as a proof of concept to prove that it worked. And then pretty quickly I realized that it was overkill for what we were doing. And then the .NET Core one, probably a couple of weeks as well. I had a lot of things in place anyway. So it was just working out the different way of doing it in more of a dynamic way. And I managed to steal a few bits from Our, so that helped.
Nice. And I think, like I said in one of the videos about the cake, as long as the end result is amazing, we're all happy.
Yeah.
And it really is an amazing end result you have with these docs.
Thank you.
Then we have some questions for Stephen. Can you recommend any good tools to make your code safer? Perhaps a good source code analyzer or testing tool, or how to get started?
Well, no.
Okay.
I mean, I've honestly just moved into security a year ago, and I never used any of those kinds of tools before that. I would need to do some research to be honest. I've been out of development for a year and a half, so yeah, leave that with me.
All right. So can you elaborate on what is the most interesting hack you have done?
That one that I demoed was a pretty good one. The PDF one. That is actually I replicated that demo from a real vulnerability that I found on an actual pen test. And whenever I seen it, I was like, that could easily have been something that I developed as an extension in Umbraco. So I just put together that proof of concept. So yeah, that was a pretty cool one. I mentioned in the talk that we don't aim to bring customer networks down. Had a pretty bad Friday afternoon one week. I was doing an internal pen test for a client, and I had kind of internal access to their VPN, and I was being a total script kiddie at the time, to be honest. I was using this script. It was a script that enumerated users from a domain controller. And what I didn't realize that the script did was it did like a kind of lightweight brute force at the end. So it tried kind of like a few different common passwords for each user. Ended up blocking out every single user account on the network, including like service critical service accounts, and yeah, IT teams don't like me.
No. There's a reason for these max free trials, and then you're out. So, all right, Callum, you also briefly touched XaminX. We have questions about your thoughts about it, and does it work together with search extension packages?
Yeah. So the short answer is no. So the search extensions package is designed to do a bunch of Lucene stuff, and so there's some specific things. However, there's no reason why it couldn't. In theory, the way Examine works is it's kind of provider based, and all XaminX is doing is swapping out that Lucene engine for an Azure search engine. So theoretically, it could work, but there's some specific Lucene stuff in there. It would be an interesting thing to try. The same for the facets package that I showed off. Currently, there's no faceting implementation for Azure Search, but it's a provider-based system, so someone could very, very easily develop one. It would be a few lines of code in reality.
Cool. Also, another one that is quite specific. Is it recommendable to use to publish search results versus casting to a custom object and storing all the data for, say, max 10 fields in the index?
Yeah, for sure you could do that. And I will, again, something I didn't quite get to show, but the Search Extensions project actually has a mapper built in. So you could go a search and then do get results of T and pass in your model, and you can then register in the Umbraco mapper the mapping from iSearch result to that, and it will do it all for you. And the same goes for faceting. So the facet model where you could cast to iPublish content, that can be of anything, of any type. So it will do all of those mappings. So there's probably benefits for doing so. I think almost always people want to fetch the actual content item out of the index, but yeah, you could if you wanted have a much more lightweight index.
Cool. There's also an interesting question for you, Matt. How long did it take to write all these docs, the content, not the solution to present it? And you can't say too long.
Oh, I was going to say too long. It's the same as Umbraco, really. It's constantly ongoing.
Yeah.
I'm still struggling to kind of keep on top of things now, and there's probably a few bits missing that I know I need to kind of get on top of. But I guess I made a rod for my own back as well, because I wanted to make sure it was like really essentially beautiful documentation. So I wanted it to look good, and a lot of documentation sites that I see are really overly technical, and I find really difficult to get my head into and understand. So I think I spent a lot of time researching how to break that down into different sections, but it also meant that it's quite it's heavily written. So there's not a lot of writing on it, but I mean it's all handwritten. The reference is auto-generated from the source code, but that's the only section. Everything else is there's a lot that needs to go into it and a lot of thought. So it takes a lot of time. But yeah, it's an ongoing thing. It took probably a month or more. I mean, even the reference documentation is using a custom tool to generate it how I wanted it to look like. So I probably spent weeks on getting that right as well. So it takes time. I think that's the only thing. It's going to take time to create great documentation. There's no shortcut really, I don't think.
No. And you don't have any recommendation to know what is not up to date anymore? Do you have any automation or?
No, I mean,
especially code examples is sometimes a mesh to ensure are up to date.
I have got I did research how to do some things early on, but I never got around to setting them up because I know there's some really interesting solutions where people are using things like Cypress, which can do automated testing, but it can also do it can take screenshots whilst it's doing the automated tests. So I have seen people who've got setups where they'll run Cypress tests, which will actually create all the screenshots. So when the UI changes, if new styles come along, if things change slightly, move around, then you can automatically generate those screenshots to keep those up to date. But no, at the moment, all of that stuff is pretty manual. The only thing that's quite useful, I guess, is how I'm doing the versioning, that everything's a complete copy, that I can just strip out anything that's not relevant anymore. And I know the historic versions have got that reference for anybody that's on those older versions. So every time I create a new version, I can just get rid of anything that's not relevant anymore, or create new up-to-date versions of that as well. So I don't have to worry as much in terms of keeping things in line. I just take a complete snapshot and start for that particular version.
Yeah, but it's actually a pretty cool idea. I guess you could use Cypress to read the documentation, read the code example, and from what version, then try to execute it somehow. I guess in some cases it should be possible. That could be cool. Keyword, sure. Yeah. All right, and for the audience, remember you can still type in questions. We still don't have any specific one for you, Mikkel. But if any of you, Matt, Stephen, and Callum, have something to Mikkel, feel free to interrupt. Otherwise, I will take a look again. We have one more for Stephen. So it's basically just someone asking you to share your slides. I guess you had a couple of cool code examples and stuff that people want to copy paste instead of watching from YouTube. So that is, I guess that is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. At some point today or this weekend, that'll be shared.
Cool. Then we have one more search specific one, or even directly for you, Callum. Do you have any hints to using spatial or geographical search and ordering? So basically ordering based on distance and so on.
Yeah, so I thought about creating a library for this as well, or baking this into the search extensions package, because it's something that comes up a lot. And Shannon has a really, really good blog post on doing spatial searches in Lucene 3, which is what's currently running in V8. But with Lucene 4, spatial actually is kind of baked in properly, and there's a fasting engine baked in too. So a lot of this stuff's going to change with V9, and I'm kind of waiting to see. And we're kind of waiting to have a chance to play with it there. All I can say for now is go read Shannon's blog. It's a really, really good article on there.
Cool. I guess we are out of all questions from the audience. So unless people are writing more, do you have anything, any questions for each other?
I'll ask one of Mikkel. So you were talking, of course, about your kind of infrastructure setup. You've got a lot of infrastructure components, and you've got Elasticsearch in there. You said you were using Azure for hosting. So how are you handling the configuration of that per project? Because there's quite a few components there.
The configuration of Azure,
or well, every infrastructure component.
Okay, so the search service is hosted specifically as serverless in app services, and there's two running instances, as I mentioned, the public API and then the private API, and that's kept totally private because of Stephen and people like him. So it's not accessible from the outside, it's only accessible from the inside. And that's all about updating the index, etc. But since this is a central service and it's not dependent on anything else, it's not dependent on Umbraco, it's not dependent on any external system, it's just APIs that ingest content, then there's actually not too many moving parts. It's just the Elasticsearch and then the two app services, that's all. And then there's the toolkit part that I described. So they have this pre-built toolkit that all the websites are built on top of. By adding compositions and grid editors and dashboards, etc., to that automatically get distributed with the NuGet distribution that they already use to the individual websites. So in that sense, the distribution of the functionality is very easy in the same sense. So basically, it's just the APIs talking together with the instances with the added UI inside. And that's also the interesting isolation between Umbraco 7, a little dated implementation, and then this very new .NET 5 search engine. But the search engine is custom built for this purpose and independent. So we use DevOps to do continuous integration and deployment. So there's basically pipelines that automatically builds and deploys on release branches, etc. So all the normal common stuff.
And I guess my question around infrastructure was, if I'm developing, let's say, a new feature against that search service, or a new feature for the search service, am I able to run that whole environment with Elastic and everything locally, easily?
Yes, because it's .NET 5, it lends itself very well to Dockerized environment. So it's very easy to run Elastic in a Docker instance and search and ingestion APIs as Docker instances. So yes, you are.
Lovely. It's, I guess, a sign of the exciting things to come in the next 12 months for us Umbraco devs.
I will say this has been a wonderful experience working with .NET 5 and Docker in this sense. Because it actually creates that, sorry, that's the Danish word, finally. Yeah. So it actually creates that completely isolated environment. So you can mess up the index, you can try a different index structure, and it won't affect any other developers working on the same project at the same time. A front-end developer just working on the listing and the filtering in JavaScript can run their complete own isolated environment as well on their own machine. So it's definitely a wonderful workflow to be able to use.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Callum, we have one more quite specific search question. How to find all the Umbraco pages you added and embed into like a map. Do you have any recommendations to how to make such a search?
So you can do, I spoke briefly about analyzers and how the analyzers run on both the data and on the query when it executes. So if you were to put any special characters into that, the chances are it will get stripped out by default. So if you had a special analyzer that was able to, pick up HTML tags, for example, and you were looking for a very specific pattern, you could do exactly that. You'd have to write a custom analyzer, but you could even do regular expression-based analysis to determine if something matches. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I guess it depends on the exact implementation of said map or something.
Yeah, I don't know the use case, but maybe for a facet it could make sense.
Indeed, yeah.
Anything else you want to share? Apparently not many questions. I guess that is because your talks was pretty good, self-explanatory and everything. Then let me hear, what do you think about Codegarden so far? Mikkel.
It's wonderful to be able to attend Codegarden. Last year was difficult because there was no Codegarden. So it's wonderful that we're actually able to do this together. But I do miss hammering nails into large logs of wood and drinking beers with people from the community and talking to people, having fun, laughs, all the great stuff that is normally also a big part of going to Codegarden. I would also like to visit Denmark. That's been a while as well for me. I'm located in the UK, so it's not too often I see those parts in the current situation. But it's definitely wonderful to be able to attend and be part of this. I'm looking forward to hearing how many people actually are attending, and if you have stats you will be sharing later on how many people go through the full conference or just pick individual talks, etc. Because normally when you're in Odense at the conference, you'll stay there for 48 hours more or less with the partying and all. Whereas here, there's too much things that can kind of distract us, our everyday work and client that you need to attend to. So that's going to be interesting to see afterwards, in my opinion. But yeah, wonderful to be here.
We were saying before the stream went live actually that it's been surprisingly exhausting still. Like even though we're not there in person, we're not out late at night, we're not travels or anything. It's still been kind of exhausting. But I'll admit I went into this with a kind of a negative feeling, like it's not the same. And I've been very impressed with how social it's actually felt. The chat and the kind of sideline conversations have definitely not replaced the hallway track or the bar track or whatever we want to call it. But there's definitely been some feeling of community spirit, which is nice. Nice. I also can't wait to be back somewhere in person though.
No, that is. I think that is the feeling for everybody. It's a nice experience, but it's still a virtual event. We're missing some of the in-person things, and personally, I'm also actually more tired than doing an in-person because I'm watching so many talks and it's so much learning all the time, and I don't have the breaks where I just have a fun talk with somebody. All right, we have some questions incoming now. So, Matt, how did you find working with .NET Core on the docs? And have you worked with .NET Core before?
No, so that was the first time I'd really played with .NET Core. As I say, I was using it as a bit of an excuse to get to know it a little bit better. I know when you start to work with things like Umbraco, if you're brand new to Umbraco and brand new to the framework at the same time, it's very difficult to know where the boundaries are. So I really wanted to use this as a way to at least learn some of those .NET Core boundaries, and then I know what is Umbraco, what is .NET Core, and any Umbracoified things that come along later on. I know how they're working. So yeah, that was the first time. It wasn't too difficult. I think other people have said it in other talks as well, that it's mostly cheese moving, so it's most of the stuff is probably still there. It's maybe under a different name or under a different namespace, so a lot of it's still there. Config and file providers were probably the interesting things at the time. As I say, I needed to use a file provider to serve the files off disk, but the way they work, the folder and files are required to, or the physical file provider needs to physically exist at the point of startup. But for me, that wasn't the case because that wouldn't get created until later on. So we had to do some fudging to make it realize it was there. But yeah, so first time, not too bad. I wouldn't say I've mastered it yet, but it's just nice to dip a toe in and get a little bit of background before I start fully on vendor work.
Yeah, hopefully you will realize that Umbraco is still much the Umbraco you know, but it is the platform that has changed underneath Umbraco. At least that was one of our goals. So hopefully you will realize that.
I think I'm from discussions with people anyway. I think everybody kind of gets that it's not that big of a change from a code perspective. And like if you do listen to like mine and Kevin's podcast, we discuss on there. Like I'm spending a lot of time planning because I know the code isn't the thing. The code is probably going to be just working through it and make it work. But the thing is how you manage the multiple versions of it. So that's the trickier thing, which is why I've been spending more time on that. But yeah, I think most people, at least package developers anyway, think along the same lines that the code isn't the thing. The thing is managing multiple.
Yeah. And I totally agree. But I think your blog post about your thoughts was very, very good, and you kind of zoom in on all alternatives and pros and cons and everything.
Thank you.
But I still think it's a case by case thing to decide what is the best fit for my package or my solution and everything.
When I spoke to Andy, we came to that conclusion as well, that it's going to be different, but there isn't one thing that will work for everybody. So it's not like if you figure this one out, that's going to work for all packages. It's not. I think depending on what your package is to, you're going to end up having to choose a different route. So there will be multiple options and multiple strategies for people.
Yeah, exactly. We also have one for Stephen. What should someone do if they find a vulnerability in Umbraco, for example, or it could be in a package? Do you have any suggestion?
Email security@umbraco.com.
Yeah, I
Keep
would
it
agree.
to yourself until it's fixed, and people have a chance to update their Umbraco solutions. I think responsible disclosures like 90 days or something, so don't write about it straight away.
Exactly, I agree. And yeah, we all try to do it as good as possible. So let us have the time to fix it. Let us have the time to provide a fix and tell people it's a security fix, so they update before we describe what the issue was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And Mikkel, we have another one for you. How do you fetch content to be rendered on the front end if it's in the index? What about templating there? And is it rendered by MVC?
So there's a server-side rendering. You need to request a server-side rendered. And then after that, it's JavaScript dynamic client-side logic applied. It's fetched through a REST API to the central search service. And that means that the central search service has all the necessary content to render that listing. And then for search engine optimization zero reasons, we do canonical linking. So that means that the actual content, should you choose to look at one of the things in the listing, you'll go to its appropriate location. So that means we don't have to keep all the content from each of the content items in the search service. We just keep that little tile that I described at the end. So we have the tiles data, the title, the image, the small text, the link, etc. That's all in the search service. And that means where we can very efficiently render the complete listing without talking to any individual Umbraco instance. But as soon as the user interacts with a single tile, then they will be sent to that appropriate place where the content lives.
Yeah, thank you. I think that is what we have time for. Thank you for being here, and again, thank you for your talks. Amazing work.
Thank you.